This is Anthony Pascal.
And this is Laurie Elster, and this is the All Access Star Trek podcast. Today we are going to review Lower Decks Season 4, Episode 8, Caves, a nice simple title for us. But first we got to go through some news because New York Comic Con was last weekend, and it was fun.
Yeah, I've never been. This wasn't your first one either?
No, it wasn't. I missed last year when the big Star Trek Picard panel happened because I was out of town. And before that, I feel like I maybe didn't know enough people. Like, I was very shocked at how easy it was to run into people that I knew in this insane crowd. I mean, I'm sure it doesn't compare to San Diego, but it's madness. And I ran into people and I had a great time and I saw lots of good Star Trek stuff and I got something for free, which was fun. I saw our friend Kevin Dillmore at the Hallmark booth, so it was great. And then I went to the panel and I interviewed Mike McMahan. So we should start with the panel. And Alex Kurtzman, who wanted to kick everything off, really, by crediting fans for saving Star Trek Prodigy. I mean, it's debatable as to whether the fans were the ones that saved it. To be fair, there was a deal that was pretty much almost done. But his point was that he was grateful for it and that fans hadn't done anything like that, he felt, since the original series' third season.
I mean, he's not going to come out and say, we were going to do this deal no matter what, but, whatever. But I think that they were, and I think this is honest, that they were impressed and surprised perhaps to see the outpouring, the campaign. He mentioned the banner flight, and I think it made a difference. There was like 3 months between the announcement, when it was removed and when it was announced. It still is the only show from Paramount that was removed that has a licensing deal. Right. So it obviously moved it to the front burner. Yeah,
I think so too. And I think that his gratitude was very genuine.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Aaron Wadke gave a little update just talking about how they're now down to the mix on the final 5 episodes of season 2, which is 20 more episodes. We know it's coming to Netflix. That was the big news last week, but we still don't know and probably won't for a few weeks how it will roll out and all that kind of stuff.
Right. We do know that season 1 will be on before the end of the year. We know that season 2 is coming next year, but we don't know in how many pieces at a time. We have our guesses, but we talked about that last week.
We had an emergency pod and everything.
I know, we did. It was fun. So Alex also gave updates on basically every other show on Paramount Plus, every other Star Trek show. And he did say, I mean, for whatever it's worth, that Paramount Plus has nothing but support, was his phrase, for the Star Trek universe, and said that there are new things in the works. I believe he meant in addition to the things we've already heard of.
Right. I mean, we're about to talk about various things. Certainly from the way I heard it, because I did listen to the event, this sounded like on top of, in addition to, he didn't mention Legacy. I don't know. I still don't think that's active project, but I can't help but imagine that's buzzing around someone's head somewhere.
Yeah, there has to be some kind of discussion going on with somebody. I don't mean an official discussion with Terry. I mean, like, some executives somewhere are having some sort of conversation to figure out if it's even possible.
Yeah. And these would be long-term things, and we're going to get into this a little later. My bet is Lower Decks is winding down, but they could be thinking about maybe some other lighthearted Star Trek thing that could come afterwards, maybe.
Let me ask you something, because to me, it doesn't sound like a smart choice. Like, you have a show that people like, you've got a whole team making it. It could definitely go on for a long, long, long time. And you have a good perspective on, like, your costs and your labor and all that stuff. So why would you?
Well, let's say there's someone else they want to work with. There's a new exciting idea. I'm not saying I know this for a fact, but I think that's a possibility. Maybe a live action comedy. Alex likes to break new barriers.
And you think they just need that slot in their production lineup, like in terms of budget and all of that? Because otherwise, why would you end a show that's doing fine and I'm sure has a relatively steady cost? It's not like, oh, we're shooting somewhere and now it's going to cost us so much more this season.
No, and Mike obviously wants to do it. I don't know. I'm just speculating. I think that there is a limit to how much Star Trek Paramount Plus can support. So if there are new things, I feel like that means that one of the current things would end. And the current things being Strange New Worlds, Lower Decks, and Academy, which we're going to get into.
Right.
But maybe they will get back up to 4 or even 5 active shows. I mean, I get the sense I get is the cost cutting at Paramount means we'll never get back to 5 active shows, which was a bit of an anomaly. But I'm not even sure 4 will happen. But this may not be shows. It could be movies. It could be anything. Who knows what he's talking about? But let's get into some of the specifics. He talked about the Section 31 movie.
Yes, and he basically said we're back on our feet because everything had been derailed in terms of planning because of the writer's strike. There's still a SAG-AFTRA strike. But he also said that Michelle Yeoh has made this a priority. And so even though they obviously have to wait till the actor's strike is over, he said she's obviously in a position to choose her projects and figure out what she's going to do next. And she's made it clear that this is definitely going to happen.
We still don't know anything about this project. And the way things are going with the SAG-AFTRA strike, it sounds like they're still pretty far away. There's some new proposal, like George Clooney's trying to solve the problem now. So
I know, but then people are mad at George Clooney. It's just getting messier, basically, is what's happening.
But it sounds like, as soon as George Clooney fixes the world, everything will be fine and Michelle Yeoh can start playing space again on Star Trek. In theory, this should start shooting in a few weeks, but I don't see that happening.
No, I don't either. So much for my optimism. It's gone.
Yeah, last week we had to update the pod.
Right.
We were being very optimistic.
Everything we said became wildly out of date about one day later.
Well,
less than a day later.
It was like hours after we recorded, the things fell apart. So it was bad.
As for Starfleet Academy, Alex said they're back in the writer's room as of he said as of last week, so the week before New York Comic Con. They still plan to start shooting next year, which is pretty close to what they were planning, and they're hoping to stick to that plan. And he reminded everybody that Tanya Newsom's in the writer's room for that one, which is important.
We still don't know. I mean, they still haven't even acknowledged, even though it's obvious it's set in the disco universe in the 32nd century. But we know nothing about the show, except it's YA focused. I mean, he did kind of talk about it in theory, in that he said it's aimed at a new generation, and he talked about how one of the things the show deals with is how the next generation takes on some of the challenges left behind by the current chick, some of the problems.
Right.
I bet they're going to try to be very topical with this show.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. And also, I think the idea is because it's Starfleet Academy, we'll see people making mistakes, which isn't something that a lot of the Star Trek shows focus on. Certainly traditionally, it was usually about people who knew the right thing to do and were just trying to do it. He was basically saying each show will have its own unique identity, and this one is different in that way. And he says everyone's been waiting. I don't know if how true this is, but he says that we've been waiting 60 years to go inside the chocolate factory. That was his expression of the Academy.
The idea of an Academy thing has bounced around for a long time.
A long time, yeah.
They talked about the Academy on the original series. It's been part of Star Trek lore since the beginning. There was one version of Star Trek 6 that got rid of the actors, or diminished them so that they could bring in younger actors, and then Harp Bennett left the project because they decided, let's not do that.
Good, because I love Star Trek 6.
Yeah, no, it's great.
I really love that movie. I think it's definitely been tossed around. We've seen glimpses of it in certain shows, like whether it was Wesley at the Academy or Picard's past at the Academy and things like that. It's an interesting idea. We'll see what happens. It's so hard to know when there's nothing to even look at.
Prodigy is Academy adjacent because now there are these proto cadets on Janeway's ship, but they're obviously heading towards getting into the Academy. I'm curious if they would actually do a season with them in the Academy. We don't know where things are going to go in the second half of season 2, but it kind of seems like the natural progression for that show. But that would be weird because that would come out at the same time as the Academy series in theory.
And to be honest, it would sort of bog them down and put them mostly in one place and sort of take away some of the adventure of what the Prodigy kids are up to.
But their whole goal, has been getting into the Academy. So they're going to have to find a way to either get around that or have them in the Academy, but on a ship at the same time. They'll be on a special flying Academy.
Yep. I'm all for the special flying Academy.
the annex. Starfleet Academy flying annex.
The mobile academy.
With Captain Tuvok. That's my guess.
I would love that. He also gave an update on Strange New Worlds, which is basically that the schedule's in flux, which we knew.
I think it's optimistic that and Section 31 are going to shoot at the same time, especially because they share the AR wall. Maybe they could pull that off. They also share some sets, but so maybe it could happen. I think Fish was optimistic that they could do it, so we'll see. But I'm not sure we're going to get new Strange New Worlds episodes in 2024. Maybe.
It's hard, all these big gaps between seasons, man.
We will be getting some Discovery, obviously.
I was going to say, speaking of gaps, it's been a while. We will be getting Discovery, and all he said about that was that it has a very satisfying ending. I would expect him to say nothing less, and that Sonequa gave the performance of her life, which I look forward to.
I mean, we were hoping for another trailer and an announcement of a date, and neither of those happened.
No, but they gave me a nice tote bag.
There was no images, no trailers, no clips, nothing for Star Trek at NYCC.
Well, except the full episode of Lower Decks.
Right, which was only shown to the audience. But they've got Discovery in the can. They've got Prodigy coming to Netflix. I thought they might show something from one of the next two episodes of Lower Decks even, and they did, nothing. There was zero reveals. You and I haven't seen the next episodes. They haven't released anything to the press. Right.
So Mike McMahan was also at the panel, and he talked about that. And he said, as you and I know, we got our screeners, and it had everything up to episode 8.
Caves, which we're about to review.
Right. And he said that 9 and 10 were deliberately held back from the press to keep the big secret of the season arc because he really didn't want it to leak. And Mike said some Reddit theories have gotten close, but no one's nailed it. And he also sort of hinted that he vaguely hinted that we might see some legacy characters or a legacy character.
I'm not sure how vague that was. That seems almost certain. And I would imagine it's someone not on the show before. So it's not like Frakes again, even though
that wouldn't be such a hinty, fun thing to bring up.
I think it's going to be Captain Worf or, it's going to be something like that. It's going to be big. Maybe Picard. I don't know.
I don't think Picard.
He described the final 2 episodes as ultimate Star Trek. I think we're going to get the USS Enterprise, is my guess.
Oh, interesting. I mean, that is ultimate Star Trek.
The Enterprise E, and doing the math, it's like, who's the captain at this point? I think Picard is still captain, barely at this point. This is before the Romulan refugee crisis. They could squeeze in one more Captain Picard in the chair. I mean, if you're paranoid about it leaking, it's got to be something like that. It can't be, no offense, Wesley Crusher showing up. That's fun. But it's not something your paranoid gets out to the press.
Right.
I feel like it's Mulgrew, Shatner, Stewart. It's someone like that. But
right. And I'm going to guess not Mulgrew only because of Prodigy.
Yeah.
That it sort of lessens the impact of that.
Or it could be, fun, but not that, but like Captain Harry Kim. That could be fun too.
That would be fun.
On the USS, whatever. But
I think they should actually call it the USS whatever.
Whatever.
I'm captain of the USS whatever.
Yeah.
He said he is currently writing the season 5 finale. And when he talked about season 5, he said, yes, we will have more visits to homeworlds like Orion, which he was like, I couldn't believe we've never even done that before. And here's my favorite phrase that he said, that he loves going to monocultures and making them less monocultural.
We've been talking about that a lot.
Yeah.
In our interview with...
Your interview with Barry Kelly.
Yeah, I mean, that was kind of the big deal. I hope to see more of this. And hopefully it is, kind of random cultures that we don't think a lot about, but it'd be fun to explore.
And I like that he thinks, I always love the Star Trek trope of like the planet where everybody wears vests, or the planet where we all have outfits that are split in half with different colors or whatever. But he's obviously trying to make those a little more nuanced.
He talked about Moopsie and Peanut Hamper. And one thing he, I think, made clear is that Peanut Hamper's not in season 5.
Yeah.
Her redemption is done, but not that, we'll never see her again. But they kind of closed out her story last week. And
yeah, they don't have any specific plans to bring her back. But I'm sure if the right idea came up.
Yeah. Talin's coming back, of course. Everyone loves Talin.
Yeah. I mean, the funny thing was he was talking about the crossover a little bit, because I think someone asked about it. I don't remember. And he said that he was really bummed that he couldn't be on set because he had a COVID scare when they were filming, and people were like sending him pictures and texting me like, Jonathan Frakes is so great. This is so fun. And he was really bummed that he was missing out on everything. And so while he was standing there on stage, he just turned to Alex and asked him for another crossover.
Alex said, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we'll, why not?
Yeah.
I'm not sure we could hold him to that.
No, they would. I mean, Mike didn't whip out a contract or anything and ask him to sign it on the spot, which I would have done. But the crowd was pretty excited to hear that. That's for sure. And the crowd, I have to say, watching Lower Decks was super fun. That was my first time watching it in a big crowd.
Another part that was part of the panel and part of just around the con and online was this collaboration with Kid Cudi. The Star Trek song was released. He was on the panel briefly with Alex. I mean, I thought it was interesting. I didn't realize like how much of a fan he really was.
Yeah, I have to say I've been, mocking this collaboration quite a bit, but I'll say this. He is a real fan, and there was a sweetness to the way that he talked about the show. I mean, it didn't make me want to buy all the stuff, but I just thought he's genuine, and he has an emotional connection to it because he used to watch The Next Generation with his dad, who is gone now, and the song is dedicated to him. And he said he really wishes that he could have known that he was doing this. So I thought was sincere and relatable.
I mean, he created this idea of this character named Captain Styles. I'm sorry.
Captain Skiles.
Skiles, sorry. Getting mixed up.
James. What? You would not want to be Captain Styles.
No. But this who's inspired, because that was his dad's name, and it's inspired, and that's this character he plays in the Fortnite thing, which was also rolled out during that weekend. And there's this clothing line, and there's some cool, I mean, it's expensive, but there's some cool shirts that I think, are modern designs, but also very fun Star Trek stuff. So I'm glad this exists. It's fun to watch the curmudgeons out like, oh, what's this? But
I'm the curmudgeon. I'm like, I don't know. What's the point of this? I don't care. But but again, won over by his sweetness, at least. And talking about his daughter playing Fortnite, where she was like, should I kill your character? But yeah, I went and looked at the stuff. We have pictures of it up on the site. It's just really expensive. Yeah. I mean, I think that a lot of their merch stuff is expensive in general, and it would be nice to see them aim to sell something to some of us who can't afford. I don't spend that money on like nice things for myself.
$45 for a t-shirt is pricey.
Yes.
Speaking of merch, but more reasonably priced, there was another panel at Comic-Con for IDW just about Star Trek. And that shows you, and they did this at San Diego too, that IDW does a lot of stuff, but they have so much Star Trek that they do separate Star Trek only panels at these conventions, just about all the Star Trek they're doing. And that's pretty cool. And they went over all the stuff. It's, if you're into the comics, you want to read it. There's a couple cool things. They announced a new miniseries coming next year called The Sons of Star Trek. And it's like about Jake and Nog and Alexander and maybe even Jack Crusher. And they're doing a special annual for the Defiant series. It's going to show Seela's origin story. And Tasha Yar will be part of that.
That's cool.
And there's some more fun stuff coming. So I'm also really looking forward to this Choose Your Own Adventure book coming out next year, which they talked about. and they showed the first image from, which just looks like fun. That's coming like next fall, so there seems to be a long lead time for that.
Well, because you have to choose your own adventure. Could take a while.
Indeed. I think that's it for Comic-Con, except we're going to get into the Mike interview in a little while. But before we move on, let's talk about a different con. I'm kind of excited about this. Creation, who used to do the official Star Trek conventions, now do the 57, 58 year mission convention in Las Vegas every year, are going back to doing regional conventions, although they've announced one. So I think this is a test run on smaller regional Star Trek conventions. And the first one they just announced is called STSF. I mean, they don't own the Star Trek franchise, so they can't call it Star Trek, but they're calling it STSF.
Okay.
What does the ST stand for? Make something up. But it's all...
Now we sound like the Strikers. That's that franchise of ours.
Yeah. Well, I guess so. This is going to happen in March. It's a lot of kind of the classic stars, a lot of next gen people, Brent and Gates, some Enterprise people,
Deep Space Nine also.
Yeah, so there's no one from the new shows like Strange New Worlds. I imagine Strange New Worlds will probably be shooting in March, so that's probably why there's no one from that show on this. Terry Metalis is going to be there, so he could talk about why they are or not making Star Trek Legacy.
Yeah, they'll be adding more names. I mean, there's no one from Voyager on the list, I don't think, yet either.
Yeah, but don't expect them. This isn't going to be like Vegas. It's a smaller venue.
Shorter convention.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a mini con, but Creation does these smaller regional things for Vampire Diaries and other things. So this is kind of their bread and butter, and I'm glad they're doing it for Star Trek again, because they used to do a ton of Star Trek conventions like in the 90s, like all over the country, and then they eventually narrowed it down to just the one giant one. And so I'm glad this exists. I'll go to it almost certainly. I used to live in San Francisco, so I love going back up there.
It's cool. I hope they do one near me at some point. It would be nice to go to a smaller one.
They used to do one in New Jersey.
I mean, sorry, New Jersey, but New Jersey's not New York.
I know, but this is, in their mind, this is their New York convention, but they hold it in New Jersey because it's cheaper and easier.
No, you can get a bigger space. I mean, the problem with New York is you have the Javits, which is way too big for a Star Trek convention, or places that are too small or too expensive. Yeah.
Yeah, like this one in San Francisco technically isn't in San Francisco. It's next to the San Francisco airport. This is being held at the Hyatt Regency at the San Francisco airport, which is nice. Let's talk Lower Decks. I think we're ready, right?
Yeah. Well, I think before we get into the episode, we have a few more things from Mr. McMahan. I got to interview him with a bunch of other reporters. He was so sweet. Like, I don't think I've met him in person before. And he made a point at each table of finding out everybody's name, where they were from, saying hi. And he just has, because you've talked to him a lot, he just has this very approachable, enthusiastic, friendly vibe. Like, he just seems like the nicest dude.
Well, first of all, he feels like he's one with the nerds.
Yes.
As it were. And he wants the nerds to know, so he's like, so when he's working these rooms, he wants us all to know he's one of us. And he is. Yeah, he's a very approachable guy.
And one of the first things I asked him about was that article that we talked about a while ago, where he seemed concerned that Lower Decks was in danger in that article, and was saying to people, like, don't wait till it gets canceled. You should be watching it now and supporting it. And it definitely had a bit of an ominous tone to it. And so I brought that up, and he said he felt like the article didn't really get the right tone, and clarified that he has never felt confident that until something's signed, he never feels like another season's coming. He always knows the nature of TV. It's volatile, and your show can go away. Your show can go away when it's done. Your show can go away at any phase. So he said it was really more of his perpetual view that is how things can go. And he didn't seem to think that it was something, I don't know. It was hard to get a take on it exactly. He seemed most concerned about the tone, that things were dire.
Yeah. I mean, he's basically saying, I always worry. I worried it with season 2 or season 3, because they got a 2-season pickup to begin with. I think that things are different now. He knows that. He was realistic even when you talked to him about that.
Yes. He didn't say nothing's changed. He didn't say that.
Yeah, it got a lot of play. We covered it. A lot of people covered it. And, those initial comments. So, maybe his hair isn't on fire over the whole thing, but someone has lit a match somewhere, So I think the show's on the bubble because 5 seasons is a lot of seasons. We're only in season 4 now, but I still think it's 50-50 at best that we see a season 6.
Right. That was a sad little sound, just so you know.
I'm not saying I want this. I'm just being,
I know. No, and I think you usually have a pretty good perspective on what's going on, and that's why I often ask you to speculate, because I think your speculation is very educated.
And he talked a bit more about this in your interview as well. I thought that it was interesting how he brought it up. He's like, if we do get canceled, it's not the end. He said there could be a movie, there could be books and comic books, and he would want to be involved in that. He brought up how Futurama came back a few times. So I think he's already thinking about contingencies. That's
right. Well, he's a smart guy, so he's already trying to figure out how to extend the life of the show. And then I'm sure with the hope, who knows, maybe then it could come back one day like a lot of these other shows have done. I mean, Futurama is a great example because it's come back twice.
He did say, actually, that he was worried about one thing. And I think this is the kind of streaming issue, which is no different than regular TV, which is you only get points if people are watching now. Like he joked, like, I don't want to become a cult hit in 10 years.
Right.
People need to watch the show now. They need to get the Paramount Plus app, subscribe, and watch it.
Right. I mean, he tried to put like a fun spin on it by saying basically like, you'll never again get this chance to like watch it the day that it comes out. It's a special thing to be able to watch an episode the day it comes out when it's new. And that only happens once, but it's the same message.
So we were talking about season 6, but season 5 is a thing and he's almost done writing it.
Yes.
One of your questions was about this issue of when you're writing season 5 in the current era, are you writing it to do double time as a series finale and a season finale?
They always want me to make sure that I'm writing something that feels like a new viewer can understand it, and that the finales feel finale-y, so that, if it doesn't continue or if there's going to be a gap, like, it doesn't feel like it's like, when Alf originally ended and he got surrounded by FBI agents pulling their gun on him and that was the last episode, and you're like, no, you just never want to be Alf. You don't want to be Alf. You know what I mean? Yeah. But as much as they want me to feel like I'm writing finales that are series finales, I just don't think I'm ever going to do it, because you want to feel like these characters are going to keep going, Like, Lower Decks isn't the Iliad, Like, it's not a place to go, It's like you're dipping in on these character arcs that are going to resolve and grow and people will change, but, like, Ross and Rachel aren't going to get married, do you know what I mean? Like, we're not drilling to this thing, but, like, for me, I want you to be satisfied at the end of the season, and I want you to want more, but to answer your other question, no, I'm even when it's smart to do it, I'll never write the series finale of Lower Decks. I'll write finales, but never the series. I
love it. First of all, I couldn't believe he referenced Alf, which, by the way, I've never seen. And our friend Christine at Trek Movie is going to kill me for this one when she listens, because she loves Alf. But I couldn't imagine. I mean, I just saw a picture from it and was like, yeah, I'm not watching that. So, but Mike loved it. And describe the ending, which you were telling me before this might not actually be how it ended.
Yeah, I didn't know either. I had to look it up online. Yeah. But he's basically right. The series ended on a cliffhanger, and he wouldn't do that. And
right.
But not that we ever expected that he would. But I think the more important thing is his Friends reference and this whole notion that the show is leading up to something. And it's not. It's not like this is all about the moment when Boimler becomes a captain. That isn't what the show's about.
Right. I like that he said he wants us to feel like the characters are just going to keep going. Like, and that was, that's how the original series ending wasn't supposed to be an ending.
Yeah, but that was the 60s as a whole. the 60s is a whole different time. It wasn't highly
No, but the
serialized.
idea, it's still back to the roots of like, this keeps going.
For sure. You know, even the series finale of Next Generation, which had a note of finality to it, was still, it's, you know, we're going to keep, of course, they were literally going to start shooting a movie in like a couple of weeks.
You were supposed to feel like they would wake up the next day after that poker game and go back to their shifts and their responsibilities and their new adventures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He got a little specific about an element of season 5 when asked, is there some part of Star Trek that, you know, you haven't done yet? And he revealed that, yes, there is. And he brought up Enterprise.
Oh, it's hard to get Enterprise because
yeah, I can imagine.
Enterprise, it's just like, it's so proto, it's so before TOS.
Yeah.
And it's so tempting because it feels like TNG, you know? And like, that's the world I play in, and I love Enterprise. And that's been the hardest, but I think in season 5 I figured out, I think I can give you guys, I haven't told anybody this yet, there is, if the deals work out, there is some Enterprise love in season 5.
Nice.
But we're early enough for that. I could be wrong about that, so like, you know, tune in next year, I guess.
So I have to ask you, who do you think, if you had to guess, who from Enterprise he'd be bringing in?
Yeah, well, it certainly sounds like he's talking, because he talked about deals. Deals means people, you know, so we're talking about big legacy returns. And the fact that he's not sure about it means it's probably not at the Dominic Keating level. It's probably, you know, so.
At the Scott Bakula level is what I'm thinking.
It's either Scott or Jolene. Scott, because, you know, can you afford him? Would he do it? Jolene is more like she just doesn't do anything anymore. She's moved on. She doesn't act anymore. She's got a family now, and she did show up at a Star Trek event a couple years ago.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
So yeah, it's probably one of those two, maybe all of them, you know, but those are the hardest ones to get.
That would be interesting, would be to get it. I mean, it would have to take place in the holodeck or some kind of time travel thing or something.
There's plenty of ways to do it.
I've been wanting to see animated Phlox for a long time.
Yeah, I don't imagine it would be hard to get John Billingsley. No offense to John, your new pal.
I know he is my new pal.
But nonetheless, the fact that he's kind of hedging, because he made it sound like it's possible this isn't going to happen, which means maybe it's just a one-off gag so that they could just remove that and put in a different gag.
I think you're right. I think it's either Scott or everybody. Getting
back to current season 4, actually, regarding the next couple of episodes, which he kind of hyped during the panel, he got the what's your favorite episode question. But I was surprised that he said episode 9, next week's episode, was his favorite for the heart. He called Crisis Point 1 his kind of favorite comedy episode. That was so broad, season 1. So it sounds like next week is going to be heartwarming and a big deal.
I mean, this week is pretty heartwarming, as we'll talk about. But yeah. Yes.
There's a lot more in this interview, which will go up on the site on Friday after this pod drops. So you'll want to read Laurie's full interview to hear. I mean, one of the surprises was he was invited to join the writers from Discovery and turned it down because he just started on Rick and Morty, which hadn't even aired. And he's like, this is a special show, I think.
And then it worked out great because what happened was it was a special show and it got him his meeting with Alex. And he basically, you know, he said he went to Alex like, you don't want to make the show I want to make because it's just going to be silly and whatever. And Alex was like, let's do it.
Yeah, I mean, he would have just been in that season 1 writer's room for Discovery, which, as we know, was a bit of a shit show.
Yes.
So he's way better off avoiding that. So he went from being one of the casualties of the season 1 writer's room to getting invited to create his own show. And that was the power of Rick and Morty.
And also his attitude about the characters, like he didn't want to help come up with all of it. He wanted to come in when it was all there for Discovery.
That was interesting how he kind of didn't want to help create characters. He liked the idea of working with established characters to see what he could do with them. So, but, you know, and this is years ago, but, you know, he was still a younger writer at the time. I think, you know, obviously now he's matured, as it were.
Let's hope never. Let's hope he never fully matures. I like him the way he is.
Anyway, let's actually talk about, because we've been going on and on about New York Comic Con, let's talk about caves. Let's get into some caves.
All right. Stupid caves. I will say that the first big laugh in watching the episode was also my first big laugh when I watched it by myself before I saw it in the crowd, which was Mariner in the transporter room.
Oh, the way she was whining?
Where her whine continued from before the beam out to after. Everybody laughed. And it was so fun to hear all that because I was like, yep.
Mike made it clear in the interviews and I think on the panel that this was a loving homage to all the various cave episodes, and they really they were super meta about that, the weird stairway and the flat floors and all the tropes of the reused cave things. But I think it was a loving homage. They weren't mocking the reuse of those things by creating this episode, which was based around that entire premise, even though I feel like they were also doing what they did on those old shows. This is a bottle show, no big guest stars.
Yeah.
And they reused the same set. And these are, I mean, in animation, sets are still sets. It takes time and money to make these things. And they reused it 4 or 5 times, So this was a money saver for them before we get to the final 2 episodes. It's very much a standalone episode, but I still liked it very much.
I loved it. First, I mean, obviously it's very sweet, which I like because the overall sentiment was really about friendship and about sort of reassuring the audience in a way that these are still our 4 core characters and that these 4 have a bond that no matter what else happens in the show is still going to be there. I thought it was a great twist on a clip show because it feels like a clip show, except that everything that happens is something we haven't seen before. And I also just thought it was hilarious. I laughed so many times.
Very funny. I do feel like how much you like this episode really relies on how much you like these 4 characters. If you're someone watching the show and are really intrigued by the season plot and want things to happen, this is a Seinfeld-like thing where nothing happens. They're just sitting in a cave telling stories. But I feel like everything is about that because it's everything about these 4 characters. It's reminding us who they are, tying up their arcs for the season. And it's funny, in your interview, Mike said there was a tiny bit where they tied it into the season arc at the end, and he removed that bit because he just wanted this to be its own thing.
Yeah, I mean, even tonally, the line he said he cut, of course, we're jumping all over, so now we're at the end, that the Vendorians say, after this, it gets a lot harder for them. And he didn't even want to spoil the mood of the end.
Which is nice. This episode was really nice. I think. But it also brought back so many of the themes of the season, the problems arising from miscommunication, the growth that all of these characters have undertaken as lieutenants. So I feel like they've come full circle on are they things working out for them being promoted? Because it kind of showed how being promoted has jeopardized their friendship because they're off having their own adventures and they're not telling each other about them.
Right. I mean, at the beginning, when they're so excited to see each other, that was to tell us that they haven't been spending time together.
Even though we have seen them together. But, of course, it is shocking, these adventures that they had where they're like, how did you possibly not tell us that?
You had a baby.
Right. But I loved it. I mean, I'm not sure I loved all the stories at an equal thing.
I think Mariner's story was kind of the weakest. The Delta Shift story was not as funny. I mean, Steve Levy was almost funnier just the way they talked about him afterwards. The story itself was great and funny and made me laugh, but just that she kept being like, your friend Steve Levy. So I thought that was really good. And Rutherford's was probably the funniest one.
I think the Levy one was the funny. I mean, I've been complaining that we don't get enough Dr. Tana. So it was great. Jillian's very funny and she was crass, but she was also sweet. She eventually got to like the baby, the little clone baby. But the Levy one was hilarious. The Vendorians just
they look so good. As soon as I saw them, I was like, oh, I remember them.
And this actually is, they did have a Vendorian briefly in another episode, but they went full Vendorian in this one. It was great. The dialogue between them and the Vendorians and all the callbacks in there were great. And what's interesting is Levy himself had a bit of an arc, and he got not vindicated, may not be, but there is some resolution to his arc, kind of in the way Badgie and Peanut Hamper and Agamus had some resolution last week. Apparently Boimler and he hang out in the holodeck now.
Yeah. It's so silly. Although actually, Tendy's story was also, when she finally got to tell it, made me laugh out loud. Also, for multiple reasons.
Right. The thing about her story, though, is everyone else's stories was about them being lieutenants and running into problems as lieutenants. Her story brought everything back to literally her first day, where she reminded them about their bond. Right. So it was very sweet.
It was first of all, when they were playing 20 questions when they're stuck on the turbolift, which reminded me of all of us in Vegas when we do infinite questions. And you can pick anything from Star Trek, and it can be like a character, the warp core, a planet, a weapon, whatever you want, and everybody's trying to guess what it is, but we keep it going until somebody guesses.
Yes, the alcohol helps, but it's a lot of fun.
It's one of our drunken Star Trek games. And also that on the second guess, is it an isolinear optical chip? You got it in 2. Made me laugh very hard. There's a game I used to play sometimes with my family, where you put a bunch of like famous people or things in a hat, and then you draw one out and you have a partner and you have to try and get them to guess it from a clue. And there was just one time I was playing with my big brother, and I pulled out a thing and I said, "You hate them." And he said, "The Friends?" And I said, "Yes." So that's what it reminded me of.
Well, in a way, because there was this look between Boimler and Mariner after that, where it showed the beginnings of the Tendi Rutherford, because that was her first day.
Yeah.
And it showed how, there's something between these two, which they showed in that episode when they go to Ferenginar, how they finish each other's sentences and they crawl over each other and are so comfortable with each other until someone mentions romance, and then they like get all flustered.
Right. I know, they're so cute.
Yeah, I still think that, Mike joked how, this show isn't going to end with Ross and Rachel getting married, but I don't think they're done with these two. I think that episode was just kind of pushing the can down further, but they're going to eventually pick up that romance can.
Sure. Just don't make more Friends references, because my brother and I hate them.
I don't think I've ever watched a single episode. But
I haven't either. And I have nothing against the actors. I'm loving Jennifer Aniston in the morning show. Anyway, sorry, but I digress. Back to this. Back to Lower Decks, which was just, there were so many different things that made me, I love that they were going back all the way to the beginning, not just from Tendy's thing, but other stuff that happened in the first season. And then there were these great lines like Mariner saying, "Yeah, a bunch of rocks always beats centuries of technological progress," which is the cave problem in all of the cave episodes ever.
I mean, it's so obviously Mike and his writers are recalling things that we've all said to each other watching the show. And we've said this on the pod about how many episodes conveniently technology has to stop working,
Right.
And how is it that rocks are stopping 24th century technology?
Right.
But
they always do. Every single time.
So when you're watching the show, he wants you to feel like you're seen, and I feel seen watching the show.
Yes, I mean, a lot of the episode, it was about Lower Decks, it was about the Star Trek franchise, and it was about fandom. I mean, certainly the Steve Levy thing was very much about fandom.
Oh, yeah. But there were other, each of the stories, besides the cave thing, which was recurring and obvious, and the establishing shots, which were all essentially the same planet with a different name, they all also had echoes. I mean, the Mariners thing was the rapidly aging thing. We've seen that multiple times. Yep. The weird alien stuff with Rutherford. We've seen Trip got pregnant, Spock's Katra. There's other,
Troy
people
got pregnant, remember?
Right. There's all sorts of weird alien stuff that the show has dealt with. And, the Levy thing, obviously, it reminded me of the episode of DS9 where they were put in, where the Dominion captured everyone and put them in a simulation.
Oh, yeah.
But there's other versions of that, some of which, and that episode, by the way, took place in a cave.
Yes, it did.
So, this is a very comforting, and I know that this episode is comfort food with a side of comfort food, I feel like.
Yeah.
But I'm enjoying it nonetheless. I love meatloaf.
I was going to say, I love a grilled cheese and fries, baby. That's my comfort food. I also thought they threw in, because there were such specific nods to the animated series, the Vendorians being the big one. They threw in other stuff that I think I believe this was on purpose, and I think it was specifically for fans, because one of the funny things about the animated series is the way they would suddenly pronounce things differently. The most famous one is like Orion became Orion. And so in this case, they were I couldn't remember. I know it's shown up in other shows, but in Devil in the Dark, Kirk calls it Pergium, the mineral that they're trying to get know. And in this show, and I can't remember what it was because it's come up on Voyager, I think, they called it Pergium. And I was like, I feel like that was on purpose.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's just like, we've seen on Strange New Worlds when Spock says sensors, they know.
Yes.
They know what we talk about. They know these little things. Yeah, absolutely.
And that kind of joke is great because it works if you know it, and it doesn't matter if you don't. It's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this episode, more than almost any other Lower Decks episode, you need to love these characters and love Star Trek deeply to enjoy it. This was very inside Lower Decks. I mean, it's all about their arcs, and I mean, sure, there was some broad comedy, but I don't think you could walk into this episode blind. And
I'm going to test that theory. I'm going to see if I can convince my husband to watch it.
Okay, we'll see.
We'll see how that goes, because I sort of feel like it works anyway, but you could be right. I mean, there are things that are just funny. I just like little details, like when Rutherford is pregnant and his belly button is popped. I thought was just like a nice, cute, fun little visual detail that has nothing to do with Lower Decks, but it's just funny.
Yeah. I mean, the guy rapidly aging with the broken leg. I mean, anyone can. It was horrible, but anyone can laugh.
It's healing wrong.
Yeah.
Well, because you knew they were lying when they said it'll heal. Like,
no. and they left his leg behind. So
yes, they did.
So you don't really have to remember, but there was, we have seen the Delta shifters before, so they had a bit of a redemption here, especially kind of the rival to Mariner.
Well, we understand them now, which makes sense. And in a way, that also ties into Trek lore, because you always do wonder about those people that we don't know and we don't see. And do they ever actually know that their ship went to a planet and they were in danger? And so the poor Delta ship, they barely see the captain. They don't get promoted. They're cleaning up everybody else's crap.
There was a funny robot chicken about the night shift on the Enterprise D. And I think Chris Pine voiced one of the characters, but it was all their spin was it's all like a party at night. They're just having fun and it's a great time. But yeah, it's if you have all these shifts now, realistically, one would imagine that there's at least a lieutenant commander, if not a commander, assigned to the Delta shift who's overseeing all of them, and that person should be telling the captain this guy should get promoted and whatever. But
no, and I just always assumed like they're that shift for a while, but not forever. I assumed that, sometimes you're on Delta shift and sometimes you're on this other shift, but maybe not.
It's more fun to create these rivalries.
Yes. No, and if you're making a TV show, you want all your characters awake at the same time. Duh.
Yeah. Indeed.
I mean, Harry Kim took some night shifts as the captain on Voyager.
What's interesting about this, it's a tiny thing, but I like the detail is, so one of the Delta shifters here, we saw him before, but he never had a line. So now they brought in, actually he is, I said there was no guest stars, Zach Cherry, who's on Severance, which is an amazing show.
I love Severance.
To voice Amado, eye patch guy. We saw him before, like in a previous season. So it's just these little tiny details where this character who was almost certainly would never notice really if they brought in someone new, but they're like, no, this guy. And in your interview with Mike, he talks about how he wants to give all of these characters on the show deep dives. He wants to do a deep dive into Barnes, the Trill that we've seen a few times. So there's so many characters. There's all these unnamed characters you want to know more about. There's the woman who has the Geordie visor. We still don't. There's no
What's
name.
Her deal? Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sure someday she's going to get a line and a name. I wonder if when they give these characters the name, like Memory Alpha referred to this character as Unknown Human Ensign Number 13. Prior to this episode, now we know him as Amado. But I wonder, in their show Bible or whatever, they must have a list of characters on the ship to use. When do they decide to give them names?
I assume as soon as someone needs to say it out loud for some reason.
Yeah, probably. But they're obviously keeping a catalog of everyone on the ship that's been shown.
Yep.
So Visor Girl will get a line someday, we're hoping.
Visor Girl.
I don't know. What do you call her?
Visor Girl. Yeah, that's what she is. And speaking of minor characters, the episode was written by Ben Rogers, who's Steve Stevens.
This just had a few actor/writers, on it. I mean, obviously Tawny Newsome herself is a writer now on the Academy show. Catherine Lynn is a Star Trek fan who used to cosplay as T'Lyn. She's a writer. She wrote the crossover episode.
I'll tell you some of the other things that got big laughs in the room as we were watching, if I remember right. Was just certain lines like Rutherford saying, "Oh yeah, I had a cave baby with Dr. T. Did I not tell you guys about that?" And definitely everybody laughed pretty hard. And when Shax came barreling into the turbolift, everybody lost it.
I'm here to save you.
Yeah. Ah! It was so good. And then they're laughing about how, well, also Tendi, I think, says, I think before that, she goes, well, I didn't love peeing in a corner. And then Boimler admits he did pee after Shax showed up. Actually, when they cut back to the four of them all enveloped in moss with their little wee faces sticking out, giggling and laughing, there was a lot of appreciative laughter in the room for that too.
Just so we understand what happened here, is the moss real?
Yes, they came to study the moss.
Right, but because the Vendorians, one could walk away thinking that it was but the Vendorians don't really create illusions. But they were observing all of this, and they were blocking the communications, so they were behind everything. So were they controlling the moss? How did they get the moss to release them? What's the relationship between the Vendorians and the sentient moss?
I'm going to guess. Okay, so here's my headcanon. They chose the moss, knowing that the moss wanted a friend.
But does the moss know the Vendorians are part of this?
I'm going to say the moss did not know.
Okay, interesting. I was thinking the moss was working with the Vendorians, but I think you're right. I think this is more observer effect, where they're just there to see what would happen, right, as it were.
They didn't know Mariner was going to say, dumb moss. But but yes, that is my theory.
So if they didn't rekindle their friendship, would the moss have killed them, or would the Vendorians have stuck larvae in their necks?
Made them stare at each other?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
Probably. Yeah, there we go. Okay. I'm not sure, it's the calm before the storm. Mm-hmm. It's a sweet episode. I feel like they've answered the question of, are these people still lower deckers, even though they're lieutenants? And I'm ready to, move on to the next thing.
Yeah, agreed.
And see, it doesn't sound like we're going to get everything in the next episode. No,
I got the sense that things are going to start heating up, but that the big stuff is all happening in the finale.
Yeah. Because last episode, there was that big reveal, right? Oh my God, the mystery ship isn't killing people. It's capturing them and stealing the ships. So I can see how some people would be like, oh, we're going to get some answers this week, and this may seem like a distraction. But I think it was a worthy pause before that.
Yeah, and I think because of the nature of the show, I don't know that people get that hooked on, like, I need to know what happens with the... I think it's one of those shows, if you enjoy it, it's because you're along for the ride.
Yeah, they haven't forced the issue, but in a way, I'm glad they removed that one line, so they weren't teasing it as well. Like, this was a standalone. They weren't dragging out that story. If they had a little bit about it, it would almost feel like, come on, stop dragging it out. But in this one, it's like, no, this is its own little bottle show, as it were.
Cave show.
Caves.
Yeah.
The word cave was used, I don't know, like 100 times in this
I know,
episode.
it's a good word. And whenever you see the title of this one, you'll remember which episode it was. You know, some episodes you see titles, you're like, I think I remember which one that was. But caves, you'll remember.
Indeed. Is that it? Do we got anything else?
I think that's it. I could just list off favorite lines, but I've done that enough. So let's move on.
I guess we should do bits of the week. Mine this week is, it's only Star Trek adjacent, but it's another thing that came out of New York Comic Con. Apple TV released a trailer for All Mankind Season 4.
I'm so excited.
I'm a huge fan. Ron Moore created the show and is the showrunner. He was, on DS9, briefly on Voyager, and one of Star Trek's greatest writers. He was obviously on Next Generation. He created all that Klingon stuff. He went on to do the Battlestar Galactica show, and I've always thought he would be, a great person to be involved in Star Trek again.
I know.
I interviewed him a couple years ago. He talked about how For All Mankind has the spirit of Star Trek. It's almost as if, what if Gene Roddenberry's vision really happened? Because it's kind of this alternate world starting in the 60s. Now they're up to the early 2000s for season 4. They're building out Mars and all sorts of crazy stuff that hasn't really happened yet.
It looks great. And if you haven't watched the show yet, I do believe that you're hooked by episode 1.
Oh, yeah. I missed season 1, but then I binged through seasons 1 and 2 in like a week and a half or something like that.
I think I was doing the same thing. I think I missed it for a while and then was like, oh my God, this is so good. And then it's fun to go back and rewatch. Also, it's a very, very rewatchable show.
Yeah, and there's some other Star Trek vets on there, notably Joe Menosky, the writer of one of the best Star Trek episodes of all time, Darmok. He's a co-executive producer. He went from Discovery Season 1 writer's room to Orville, and is now, Ron Moore poached him, and he's doing great work on this show.
He's an interesting fellow.
Very, yeah. I'd love to do an interview with him, but he doesn't do interviews with anybody. But
I would love for you to interview him, and I would be afraid to do it myself because I'd blow it. I would want you to do it.
What's your bit of the week?
Mine is, I've been trying to catch up on my 7th Rule episodes. And I was like, oh my God, they had Melinda Snodgrass on to talk about Measure of a Man, which she wrote. And Denise Crosby was in that one, interviewing her with Sirach and Ryan. And it's a classic Star Trek episode. She describes like making the sail, and basically she became a writer on the show because of that episode. She came in, they asked her to do revisions and really liked the way that she handled it, and basically said, can you start Monday? And she was living somewhere else and moved within like 3 days. But she talks about how Gene Roddenberry almost derailed her whole episode, and then fortunately he got sick and couldn't, and they just finished it while he was sick, and then he came back. But I don't want to say everything she said, because I think people should go listen, and also because the 3 of them, the hosts, were so impressed by the episode. I mean, Ryan Husk had obviously seen it before a million times, but the other 2 hadn't. So it's great to see their reactions to it, and it's just really fascinating little bit of Star Trek history.
It's, it's one of those episodes, I think it's taught in college. It's quintessential Star Trek, Measure of a Man. So I'll have to check that out for sure.
Yeah, the details she gives are just terrific. Worth a listen.
Well, that's it for our New York Comic Con wrap up and our discussion of Caves. 2 more episodes. I'm so excited to watch the final 2. I can't, unlike previous weeks, we could immediately go from recording this podcast to watch the next episode. We still don't have it. I don't know when we're going to get it. Hopefully before, so we can record in advance.
Yeah, let's hope.
We may be out there with the rest of you guys watching it Thursday, but we'll still get a podcast out and a review out. But anyway, see you next Friday.
See ya.